Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. I thank you all for watching. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Philosophy Clips. In this philosophy clip, I'll be talking about the ethical topic of the wrongness of killing. And in particular, I'll be talking about Don Marquis's deprivation theory, the wrongness of killing, which was developed prominently in his 1989 essay titled, Why Abortion is Immoral. Now, I won't be talking about Marquis's view on abortion in this video. I'll be talking about his theory of the wrongness of killing that he develops in that paper. So his theory is the deprivation theory of the wrongness of killing, the deprivation theory of the wrongness of killing, DTWK for short. If you're interested in his view on abortion, his argument for his pro-life, his moderate pro-life position, have a look. I've got a video on that below. So let's do some stage setting. What I want to do with respect to this video is first do some stage setting, set up DTWK, and then I want to talk about some of the positives, some of the pluses associated with accepting such a theory, and then I'll talk about a challenge to the theory and then Marquis's response to that challenge. That's the big picture game plan here. DTWK, the deprivation theory, the wrongness of killing, is the topic. And let me do some stage setting by looking at just a couple, toy theories that are out there for what would explain why it's wrong to kill someone. Keep in mind, let's just maybe keep things simple. We're thinking about theories about like why it would be wrong to kill someone like you and I. So one view that's out there that you might see is called the brutalization view. So according to that view, what makes killing me wrong, supposing I'm the person who's killed, is the fact that my murderer, the person who murdered me, is brutalized. So the action of murder makes the murderer worse or vicious or brutal, and that's what primarily explains why it's wrong to kill me. Now I'm guessing you're going to think that this is a bad theory, and you're likely to think it's a bad one because the primary victim in that theory is the murderer. Don't we think that in a theory of the wrongness of killing, the primary victim should be the person who is, murdered? Well, it seems like that's what the brutalization view gets wrong. And so we learn something interesting by reflecting on that theory. It's a bad theory, but we learn something. We learn that we want an account of the wrongness of killing that has it that the person who is killed is a primary victim. Now, of course, in a well worked out, fully worked out theory of the wrongness of killing, of course, the brutalization of the murderer can feature in. He can be one of the victims. He's a victim to himself in his own actions, you might say, at least in a range of cases. But here we're looking at working out just sort of what we would take to be the general features, what we would most essentially want in a theory of the wrongness of killing, and this brutalization view fails. Another view that fails in the same kind of way is one which would have it that what makes it wrong to kill me, again, for example, would be the fact that my loved ones would suffer from the grief of the loss that would come from me being killed. Once again, we can all agree that loved ones of those who are killed, those who are murdered, they're victims. In fact, they're in many cases terrible victims, suffering greatly as a result of the loss of the loved one. But once again, this theory fails because it fails to account for the fact that I'm the primary victim of murder when I'm murdered. Moreover, you could count the ways that the brutalization view and now this loved one's view fail. And one of the ways in which this latter view fails, this loved one's view fails, is that suppose I were a philosophical hermit without any friends, family members, anyone who loved me. It looks like that view may struggle to account for it being wrong to kill me, and that seems to be the wrong result. So we've got the brutalization view, it fails. We have the loved one's view, it fails. We need a better theory, and this is where Marquis comes in and says, I've got a better theory, one that gives us what we want. It gives us a theory that has it that the person who is killed is a primary victim, and it also would account for the way we ordinarily would think about death being wrong. So, of course, we're going to think about the grief that our loved ones endure when people are killed, when they're murdered. But of course, we want also to lock in on what's happening to the victim, what explains why the victim is a primary victim of killing, insofar as it's wrong to kill that individual. And Marquis claims that the most natural, the most intuitive theory here is the deprivation theory. So the deprivation theory has it that that what makes it wrong, at least in a wide range of cases, to kill me, to kill one of us, is the fact that killing one of us deprives us of the life that we would have had, the future of good that we would have had. So the theory is a deprivation one, so we have to fill in where the deprivation would fit in, and it fits in with the fact that we were deprived of the future that we would have had were we not to have been killed. So that's just in broad brushstrokes what the deprivation theory, the wrongness of killing, is. We can state it a bit more carefully in the following way. It is wrong to kill someone if, so emphasis on the if here, if killing that someone amounts to depriving them of a valuable future, the valuable future that they would have had were they not to have been killed. So I say that there's emphasis on the if here for Marquis because he doesn't want to claim that killing someone is wrong only if they're deprived of a valuable future. That condition is just far too strong. In other words, there could be other conditions, there could be other reasons, other explanations that account for why it's wrong to kill someone. It's just, on Marquis's view, it's sufficient that it's wrong to kill someone that they're deprived of a valuable future. So his view is a very general one and providing a sufficient condition, not also a necessary one. And again, this has got the virtue of accounting for a wide range of cases of the wrongness of killing, without being the only explanation, right? So you might think that there are cases in which someone's not guaranteed, in fact, they're positively predicted not to enjoy a valuable future. For whatever reason, it promises all kinds of suffering. Doctors and the like have made the relevant predictions, and it's 99.9% likely that this person is going to suffer, and that person's killed. They're not deprived of a valuable future in this case. Marquis can say, no big deal. There's something else that explains why it's wrong to kill such individuals. So his view doesn't have that necessary condition. Okay, so just so we're clear, the view is it's wrong to kill someone. It's wrong to kill X, person X, if killing X deprives X of a valuable future, the valuable future that X would have had were X not to have been killed. Now maybe you can see this. I put the view in terms of a little bit of a graph here. So we've got on this column here, this axis here, we have well-being levels. So we're going to understand the valuable future that one would have, or just the valuable life that someone would have in terms of the well-being levels that they have. And that can be cashed out in terms of happiness levels, perhaps virtue levels, perhaps friendship levels, etc., etc. We don't have to have that theory fully worked out. And then on this axis here, we have the time axis, which in terms of years. So let this just be me, and suppose I'm killed at 40 years old. Suppose I'm killed at 40 years old. Well, let's just suppose, just for simplicity's sake, this is the well-being level right here that I experience. If you were to accumulate or aggregate the momentary levels of well-being, you get that right here. And it's a good thing, right? It's not in the negatives, but there I was just simplifying. And then I'm killed at this point. But suppose that had I not been killed at 40, I would have lived to over 80, and that I missed out on all this goodness over here. I missed out on all that. So this is the overall well-being I would have had were I not to have been killed here. So my lifetime well-being levels have been compromised. I've been deprived of this chunk of well-being here. And so what Marquis wants to say is that if I'm deprived of this much well-being, if I'm deprived really of any well-being, this is just a toy model. Suppose that had I not been killed at 40, I would have died at 45. I still would have been deprived, presumably, of some positive well-being. Let's just suppose, for argument's sake, the view is just that insofar as I'm deprived of any value that I would have had were I not to have been killed, then my being killed amounts to there being a wrong. And again, it's a sufficient condition, not a necessary one. Hopefully that graph model helps out with thinking about the view. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. Hopefully you're able to see it okay. So hopefully we're understanding DTWK, we're understanding how Marquis understands it. Now let me just say a few words about why you should want to accept it. And then we'll talk about why perhaps you shouldn't want to accept it. So one thing to note is that we can account for the relevant property here that makes killing someone wrong in natural terms, meaning we don't have to appeal to the fact that, so-and-so is a child of God, or so-and-so is sacred because he or she was created by God, or something like that. So there are views out there that are sometimes called sanctity of human life views, and Marquis, he ends up arriving at the same conclusion that the sanctity of human life theorists do. He just doesn't arrive at the same conclusions in the same way. He thinks that he can account for the wrongness of killing in purely natural terms without having to invoke anything involving the supernatural, like being created by God or being sacred because one was created by God, or something like those properties. And so Marquis, he's sometimes accused of developing a religious philosophy, but if you were to ask him, I've seen him state this live, and he says that he doesn't have a religious bone in his body. So he's not moved by any religious considerations. He thinks that the property that accounts for, at least in many cases, sufficiently why it's wrong to kill someone is a purely natural property. And it's the property of being deprived of a valuable future. That's a natural property. There's no need to think that that's a non-natural property or supernatural property of according to Marquis anyway. So that's one reason to accept it. You might want to ask, well, why is that a good reason to accept it? Well, there's no religious commitment there. There's no sort of major worldview commitment, metaphysical commitment, as sometimes we say in philosophy, and that counts in its favor. So even the atheist, as it were, could accept, the atheist naturalist could accept this view. So the view can have wider appeal. Another reason for accepting the view, according to Marquis, is that the view is not species chauvinistic. So when you think about the sanctity of human life views, it's human life that's sanctified, or that's sacred, or that has these supernatural qualities. According to Marquis, the deprivation theory, the wrongness of killing, is one that could apply to our non-human animal friends, cousins, because if they have the property of being such that they're deprived of a valuable future when they're killed, then it may very well be wrong to kill them. And likewise, if we were to encounter, perhaps in our SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence studies, inquiries, if we were to come in contact with beings that were like us but weren't human beings, so they were rational and all the rest, but weren't biologically like us, then the DTWK would predict that it'd be, all things being equal, wrong to kill them as well, because presumably they would have the property of being deprived of a valuable future when they were killed, at least generally, once again. So the view isn't species chauvinistic. It's not just the human species that's relevant here to the theory. So this is another way in which the theory has broader appeal, because it's it's not, as Peter Singer would say, speciesist. So Marquis uses the expression species chauvinistic, but if you're familiar with Singer's terminology, or just perhaps general terminology here, there's the expression speciesist. You could say that Marquis's theory of the wrongness of killing, it's not speciesist. It doesn't privilege one species over others on unjustified grounds. So this feature of DTWK gives it more broad appeal. Moreover, the theory DTWK is consistent with active euthanasia being permissible. And this is supposed to be an important point because Marquis and other ethicists think that that active euthanasia is permissible, at least sometimes. This is important because the sanctity of human life theorists, they're in many ways the target of Marquis, because he's developing a view, again, that arrives at the same conclusion but in a different way. According to the sanctity of human life theorists, they're going to maintain that active euthanasia is impermissible. They tend to make a distinction between killing and letting die as being morally significant, so they maintain that while it's okay to passively euthanize someone, that is to say, remove life support from someone, that's the perhaps easiest way of thinking about it initially, but it's problematic, it's wrong to directly kill. There's a moral difference between letting someone die, removing them from life support, and lethally injecting someone, albeit with the relevant palliative care. And what Marquis and other philosophers think is that there's no real morally relevant difference between passive euthanasia on the one hand and active euthanasia on the other. We don't have to get engaged in this debate here. It's just important to note that Marquis, he takes it to be an advantage of the deprivation theory, the wrongness of killing, DTWK, that it can account for the consistency or the permissibility, of active euthanasia. It doesn't rule it out categorically, as do the sanctity of human life theories. Okay, the kinds of arguments that you would see for the claim that active euthanasia is permissible, they're going to be arguments that say that, look, what explains why it's permissible to passively euthanize someone? Why is it okay when someone's on her deathbed to say, look, I don't want treatment, so please give me the palliative care, but remove me from life support. And those considerations typically involve like respecting the autonomy of the patient and mercy, right? We want to respect the wishes, but also in order to make sure that that patients aren't unnecessarily suffering greatly. And we feel like sometimes of these patients, their family members can make the call to alleviate the unnecessary suffering that the patient's going through. And adherents of those who think that active euthanasia is also permissible would want to say the very same considerations can apply in the case of active euthanasia. So if a patient can say, for example, please don't give me life support, please don't continue life support, they can also say, please lethally inject me. Again, we don't have to take a stand on those considerations in favor, that are supposed to be in favor of active euthanasia. Just wanted to note them before moving forward. Okay. So those are several different reasons. We talked about 3 different lines of support for DTWK. The first was that we got a natural property as opposed to a supernatural one. The second line of support was that the view is not speciesist or species chauvinistic. And the third line of support is that DTWK is consistent with active euthanasia being morally permissible. But now let's turn our attention to the most prominent challenge, the most pressing challenge to the deprivation theory, the wrongness of killing, and it's often called the contraception objection. The contraception objection. So how does this objection go? Well, it goes like this. If DTWK, the deprivation theory, the wrongness of killing, is true, then contraception use is impermissible. That's step 1. Step 2 is, but contraception use is not impermissible. That is to say, it's permissible to use. Therefore, DTWK is false. So a way of thinking about it, perhaps more simply, is since DTWK implies that contraception use is wrong, DTWK itself is wrong. Okay, so the theory implies something false, so the theory itself is false. So we might want to wonder why think that DTWK would imply that contraception use is wrong. Well, the idea would be that the entity that would come into existence, the zygote that would come into existence, were contraception not to have been used, right? That being that potential zygote, possible zygote, is then deprived of the valuable future that it would have had were contraception not to have been used. So it looks like there's going to be a range of cases when contraception use is effective, in which we end up with victims of deprivation. And so it looks like DTWK is saddled with this really implausible conclusion. So keep in mind that the argument, the contraception objection, is just initially assume that DTWK is true. It implies that contraception use is impermissible. The argument isn't saying that contraception use itself is impermissible. In fact, it's claiming that it's permissible, and that's the problem for DTWK. So that's just an important note so you understand the structure of the argument. So once again, just so we're totally clear here, when contraception use is effective, according to the objection, there is an entity, the possible zygote, the egg that would have been fertilized, that serves as or is the entity that is deprived of the valuable future that it would have had. So were contraception not to have been used in the circumstance, then the egg would have been fertilized, the zygote would have formed, and then it would became an embryo, and then a fetus, and then a baby, and then a toddler, and then it's off to the races, just like you and I. Okay, so that's the contraception objection. On Marquis's view, contraception use is perfectly permissible. So if there's a problem with the argument, it's with the first premise. It's with claiming that DTWK itself implies that contraception use is wrong. And what Marquis wants to say is that that premise is false. Why? Because DTWK is true, but it's false that it's false to claim that contraception use is thereby impermissible. Why? Because in the case of contraception, as it turns out, on Marquis's view, there's no victim of deprivation. And to show this, Marquis goes through 4 possibilities as to the relevant possible candidates of being the victim of deprivation in cases of contraception use. So the response to the first 2 cases is going to involve claiming that it's arbitrary. So the first possibility is that it's the ovum, the female egg, that's the victim. Second possibility is that it's the male sperm, that's the victim. Marquis claims that it's arbitrary to claim that it's either, so perhaps it's both. Perhaps we have 2 victims, so we consider this set. It's the ovum and it's the sperm, but not the fusion of the 2, not the fertilization yet, but just them taken separately but together in this set. And Marquis's response here is that there's too many victims here. We think that in cases of contraception use, when it's effective, if there's a victim, there's only one victim, at least generally. So that leaves the last possibility, and it, by all accounts, is the most plausible possibility. It's the case of the ovum that's been fertilized, or the ovum that would have been fertilized, were contraception not to have been used. And what Marquis wants to claim here is that there's no identifiable victim there either. He was dinged for claiming this, so he ends up later in another work claiming that we need to make sure that we distinguish between deprivation on the one hand and prevention on the other, or mere prevention on the other. So you might think that that this is a natural way of organizing things. There's prevention, which is the general concept, and among the kinds of preventions there are deprivations, but there are also just what we might call mere preventions. So a bit of this is my terminology here, just to capture the Marquis. The idea being that, imagine a case in which I prevent you from a cupcake that was given to me for my birthday. It's a small cupcake. It was given exclusively to me, and you want some of it, and I don't share with you. I prevented you from having some of that cupcake, but I haven't deprived you of anything. But you could imagine a case in which I was given a whole cake to share with you, and I prevent you from having any of that cake. In that case, surely I've deprived you of something. So not all preventions are deprivations. Some preventions are mere preventions because they don't deprive. And that's like the cupcake case. The case where you have a prevention, which is also deprivation, would be the example of the cake that was given to you and I. Now, the same thing can apply, the same distinction can apply in thinking about the contraception objection. Marquis can say, sure, it is the case that something is prevented from coming into existence, but it doesn't follow that that something is thereby deprived of anything. Only beings that say actually exist are subjects of candidates for deprivation in the first place. So he ends up wanting to claim that in sort of the final analysis, which he doesn't develop in his 89 piece, but he develops later, just for those of you who are interested, he ends up claiming that it's certainly true that contraception prevents entities from coming into existence. Contraception is effective, after all. People wouldn't use it if it weren't effective. So it does prevent beings from coming into existence. It prevents zygotes from forming, turning into embryos, etc. But it doesn't follow from that they are deprived, because they could just be merely prevented from coming into existence. Moreover, he wants to say that no actual thing can be a victim of anything, let alone deprivation. So let this conclude my video discussion of DTWK. We talked about how the theory is supposed to go, how we're supposed to understand it to apply generally and sufficiently in a wide range of cases. We talked about its virtues. We talked about the contraception objection. And then we concluded with Marquis's response to the contraception objection. If you have any questions, comment below and get a hold of me otherwise. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.